For better or worse, Super Paper Mario is probably one of the most unique Mario games ever created. From its weird characters to its strangely dark story, Super Paper Mario is different from other Mario games, and it doesn't care who knows it. But there is one mechanic in this game that is especially unique. A mechanic that, when I first saw it way back in 2007, literally blew my mind. This game is almost 20 years old? Dear God. The mechanic I'm of course talking about is Mario's ability to flip to 3D. With the press of an A button, or a press A if you will, the player can change Mario's 2D environment to one that is fully 3D. This is used to solve puzzles, find secrets, and even talk to NPCs. It is the most important mechanic in the game, and one that Super Paper Mario is completely built around. But what if I told you, you could almost beat this game without doing it at all? That wouldn't even seem possible, right? This game is so long, and there are so many times where you need to flip to 3D to bypass an obstacle or complete a puzzle. How in the world could you even come close to beating it without flipping to 3D? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're about to find out, because what I have in store for you today is something truly insane. With the help of Moonrise and the Super Paper Mario speedrunning Discord, I am here today to show you the world's first minimum flips to 3D Super Paper Mario run. I really hope you enjoy. Guys, if you think Super Paper Mario has the best story out of every Mario game in existence, please like this video. Thank you. So, one thing I should explain before we get started is that a full run of this minimum flips to 3D category has never actually been completed. Mostly because there's no one insane enough to try. It has multiple insanely hard tricks, and some that take multiple hours to pull off. And by multiple hours, I mean like 10. So instead of this being a full complete run, it's basically going to be multiple clips stitched together to show what a theoretical minimum flips run would look like. I essentially went through the entire game and counted every single flip to 3D that was mandatory for progression. Then Moonrise just kinda showed me ways to skip the vast majority of them. And let me tell you, there are a lot of them. Flips to 3D, I mean. After going through the entire game, I counted there were 151 mandatory flips to 3D needed to beat Super Paper Mario. But how did I determine which flips were mandatory and which flips weren't? You would think it would be easy, but it was actually surprisingly difficult. Situations like this, where you need to flip to 3D to enter a 3D door, are obviously mandatory. But what about a situation like this in Chapter 5, where you're supposed to flip to 3D to learn these blocks are breakable with Kudge? Technically, you can break them well in 2D, but is a casual player gonna know that without flipping to 3D? I don't know, maybe. It's kind of a gray area though. Ultimately, I decided if a player could reasonably figure out a puzzle or progress without flipping to 3D, then I wouldn't count it. I really wanted to focus on flips that were absolutely mandatory for progression, so that's what I did. Now with that being said, let's hop into the run. So, believe it or not, guys, I have a wife. I know, it's crazy, right? One of the things my amazing wife does is cook all the meals in the house. But if she's gone and I have to fend for myself, it's usually a problem. That's where Factor comes in. Factor delivers meals straight to my door based on what I want to eat, and all of those meals can be heated in minutes using an oven or a microwave. These meals are fresh, never frozen. So if my wife's gone, I don't have to eat some frozen garbage. I can actually eat something that's good. With Factor, I don't have to do anything. I just open it up, pop it in the microwave, and I'm done. It's also super helpful for my wife. If she's busy or just doesn't feel like cooking that day, she can pop one of these bad boys in the oven and my kids can eat something they actually like. If you go to factor75.com, you can create your very own plan with over 80 plus options to choose from. They have roasted garlic chicken, keto blackened salmon, they even have the barbecue pork sloppy joe, which is top rated by the way. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code PRESSAFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code PRESSAFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video, and back to the video. So basically, how this is going to work is we're going to look at each chapter in the game, see how many flips are required to beat that chapter, and then see how many of those flips we can actually skip. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, it's not, because it's going to get really crazy. And by it's gonna get really crazy, I mean like it's gonna get really crazy right away. Because literally the first thing we have to do before we do anything else is complete the Pit of 100 Trials. If you didn't know, the Pit of 100 Trials is a 100-floor gauntlet with increasingly tough enemies, a brutal final boss, and if you die at any point during your trek down there, you have to start the whole thing over again. Even though you can enter the pit as soon as you get Boomer from Chapter 2, it's generally not advised to attempt it until you're later on in the game and are able to deal with stronger enemies using your Pit Souls or Bowser's Broken Fire attack. That being said though, it is technically possible to beat it as soon as you get Boomer, as he is really the only requirement to actually beating the pit. This is because there are enemies such as Slurps and Schlorps that can only be damaged with Boomer's help. If you didn't know, the way to progress through each floor is by killing the enemy holding the key to the next room. So if you somehow entered the pit without Boomer and got unlucky enough that one of the keys spawned in one of those Schlorps, your run would be over since you wouldn't be able to kill it and get the key. Despite this though, there is a way to beat the pit without Boomer. Once you get Thorough from Chapter 1, you can use him to throw enemies out of bounds, which will spawn the key inside of them right by the exit. The problem is, we can't unlock Thorough before we get to the pit. The whole reason we're trying to beat the Pit of 100 Trials is to unlock Dashel, a pit soul who makes Mario run really fast and will save us a bunch of flips later in the run. One of these flips that Dashel saves though is the flip to unlock Thorough. So that means to start off this run, you would have to do one of the hardest challenges in Super Paper Mario, beating the Pit of 100 Trials completely pixelless. Now, this is actually possible. In fact, it's actually been completed by 3 people in real time. It's just insanely hard and completely dependent on luck. Remember those Schlorps we talked about earlier? Well, since we have no way of killing them now, we just have to hope and pray that the key spawns in a different enemy. That's literally all we can do. Thankfully, it is actually possible, as every floor that has a Schlorp has other enemies that the key can spawn in. However, there are a couple of floors that have enemies on them that we can't kill. Specifically, floors 21, 25, 73, 84, and 98. These floors all have enemies that are completely unkillable without Pit Souls and have no other ones that the key can spawn in. Which means to get the keys, we need to kill these enemies. This brings in the next luck-based component of the Pit-Soulless Pit of 100 Trials run. Item drops. When you kill an enemy in this game, it has a chance to drop an item. And depending on what it is, you could use said item to deal damage to other enemies. This right here is the only way the Pit of 100 Trials is doable without Pit Souls. Obviously though, this would take a lot of luck. You can, however, mitigate this quite a bit by going to Chapter 1-1, farming up a bunch of coins, then heading back to the shop in Flipside and stocking up on a bunch of offensive items like Ice Storm and Shell Shocks, which can then be used to kill all those impossible enemies I was talking about earlier. However, the one thing we can't mitigate is our need for Block Blocks, an item that makes Mario completely invincible and is needed for a bunch of skips early on in the run. The only place you can get Block Blocks though is Not So Shop in Flopside, which we don't have access to yet, and as drops from Tyloids, Hooligans, and Berry Bats. Luckily for us though, Tyloids and Hooligans spawn in the Pit of 100 Trials. So if we get lucky, we could get all the Block Blocks we need just by killing enemies in the pit. The only problem is there are only 3 Hooligans in the entire pit, which only have a 3.2% chance to drop a Block Block. And while there are 40 Tyloids, they have an even worse drop rate of around 1%. To make matters even worse, we need 6 Block Blocks to complete this minimum flips run. So to recap, we need keys to not spawn in enemies we can't kill, we need other enemies to drop offensive items for us, and we also need the 3 hooligans and 40 Tyloids to drop at least 6 block plots for us. To get all of this to happen in a single trek through the pit would be extremely unlikely, but it is still technically possible. So now that we know how we're actually going to get through the pit, we have to talk about how we're actually going to get there. Because to actually get to the pit, you need to get the old key from Merlon, which can only be obtained after you save Princess Peach after Chapter 1 is completed. Again though, we need Dashel from the pit to save a bunch of flips in Chapter 1, so completing it isn't an option. So what are we gonna do? Well, we're gonna use a trick called Merlon House Clip. To perform Merlon House Clip, you need to enter Merlon's home and flip to 3D. Yes, basically the very first thing we do in a minimum flips run is flip to 3D. But trust me, it's worth it, because it'll save us from doing a bunch of flips in the future. So once you flip to 3D, you want to clip yourself into the book on Merlon's table here. Once in the book, you need to perform some very precise inputs, which will get you in between the wall and the book, which actually causes the book to push you out of bounds. Now that you're out of bounds, you can walk along the seam of the house and exit it. Since we just exited the house in an unintended way, the entirety of Flipside has become a black void. But just because we can't see Flipside or the objects in it doesn't mean they aren't there. The gate, for example, that you need the key I mentioned earlier is still blocking our path. Luckily though, since we're still out of bounds, we can just walk along the edge of the level and bypass the gate without ever having to use the key. Now, we can keep walking and take the 3D path to the Flipside outskirts, where we can take the pipe down to the next floor. Here's how the whole thing looks when you can actually see what's going on. Walk along the seam, jump past the gate, and take the 3D path to enter the pipe. It's really that simple. So now that we're in the basement, we need to perform another trick so we can keep progressing towards the pit. These blocks right here are why you need Boomer to enter the pit of 100 trials. As you can see, they are completely blocking our path down to the next floor, even if you flip to 3D. Luckily though, getting by them is actually pretty easy. This trick is called crouch clipping, and it's incredibly powerful. Basically, every corner in this game can be clipped through if Mario is crouching and has a minimal downwards velocity. All that really means is as long as a corner isn't below you, you can clip through it by crouching. As you can see here, Moonrise jumps into the air, crouches, and clips through the block, allowing them to take the pipe down to the next floor. Unfortunately though, on the next floor, we have to use our second flip of the run. To get to the pit, you need to go down this 3D hallway, and there's just no known way to bypass this without flipping to 3D. But don't get discouraged, because that's the last flip we'll be using for a while, because we just made it to the pit of 100 trials, where we can get the 6 block plots needed for the rest of the run and fight Racktail, the boss of the pit. If you're familiar with this game at all, you'll know the Racktail fight is basically the same as the Frattail fight in Chapter 1. The way it works is that Racktail will come across the bottom of the screen and try and attack Mario. At that point, you need to switch to 3D and jump on his back. Once on his back, you can use Throw to pick up enemies and throw them at his weak point. Obviously, we can't do either of these things though, so what are we gonna do? Well, to get on Rattail's back, we can actually use an item called a Shell Shock, which shoots out a shell in front of Mario, damaging all enemies in his path. The thing about this shell though, is that it will also damage Mario if he gets hit by it. So if we come over by the edge of the screen and bounce a shell off of it as soon as Rattail comes for his attack, we can damage Mario with the shell, which will in turn give him immunity to all other attacks for about a second or so. This allows Mario to dodge Rattail's attack and get on his back without flipping to 3D. To actually attack his weak point though, we need to use one of those block plots I kept mentioning earlier. Basically, block plots make Mario invincible and push back enemies that come in contact with him. So Moonrise uses a block while on Rattail's back, then runs into these two enemies, pushing them up in the air. Once high enough, he jumps on one of their heads, which gives him just enough height to reach Rattail's weak point and complete one cycle of the fight. To actually kill him, Moonrise would have to do this 2 more times, using 2 more shells and 2 more block plots. If you're wondering where he got the shell shots from, you can buy them at the shop in Flopside, or this enemy will drop them on floor 52 of the pit. But yeah, with all that done, we can unlock Dashel and start off the game by finally entering Chapter 1. So, Chapter 1-1 has 4 mandatory flips to 3D that we need to find a way to skip in one way or another. The first flip is needed to enter this door encased in blots. The second is to get around this super tall pipe. The third is to take this 3D path so you can cross the large gap, and the fourth is to get around this tall wall that is too high to jump over. They all seem pretty impossible, right? Well, they're not. Thankfully, the solution to all of them is actually pretty simple. For the door encased in blots, we can use another crouch clip to clip through the corner and get us to the door as shown here. For the tall pipe, Moonrise uses the same strat they used in the rat tail fight by using a block, knocking enemies into the air, then using a bounce off their head to get just enough height to make it past the pipe. The exact same thing can be done to cross the gap. You just need to knock the enemies across it, jump on their heads, and clear it. And for the last one, it can be solved in the exact same way. In fact, all 3 of these skips I just mentioned can be cleared using the same block, which is important because we only have 2 left and we're gonna need them both. So the next area we go to is 1-1. And the first thing we encounter is this blue switch that requires you to flip the 3D so you can hit it. But yeah, Moonrise is just gonna use another crouch clip to clip to the corner of this block and hit the switch, which spawns the floating blots and allows them to make their way up the mountain. In the very next room, however, we come across another obstacle, these 3D blocks. The way these things work is they won't show up in 2D until you swap to 3D and hit them. Since we can't do that though, Moonrise finds another way around them. In the room we were just in with the floating blots, Moonrise does a crouch clip through the corner of this wall and falls into a secret room whose exit actually lets you into the other side of those 3D blots in the other room. In case it didn't really make sense, this is the door you're normally supposed to go through, which leads to the 3D blots here. But Moonrise clips through the corner down to the secret room and goes through this door, which comes out to the other side of the blots, which are once again here. This allows them to climb the ladder and skip having to hit those blots at all. Speaking of climbing the ladder, they have to do just that to get past our next obstacle. Literally, right after the 3D blots, the game expects you to flip the 3D so you can jump on this bridge and traverse to the other side. But instead of doing that, Moonrise repeatedly jumps off this ladder to the right as far as they can. Doing this gets the paratroopa who normally doesn't spawn until you're on the bridge to actually spawn. As you can see, Moonrise waits for it to spawn, then follows it down to the edge of the bridge and jumps off its head so we can reach it without having to flip to 3D. Oh, and for the rolling spike balls right after, I actually thought you needed to flip to get by them, but no, you can just jump right over them and it's really not even that hard. To end off 1-2, you need 2 more flips. One to talk to this red guy who builds you a bridge to Yold Town, and one more to access this pipe which leads to Thoreau. Thoreau himself isn't really the roadblock, but you have to unlock him so the town mayor will give this green guy a call, who will then in turn build you a bridge across this gap. But yeah, with Dashiell's help, we don't need to build either of these bridges. We can just use him to jump straight over both gaps, ending off 1-1 and completely skipping Thoreau in the process. Well, kind of. For some reason, even though a casual player would probably never be able to skip Thoreau by accident, Nintendo actually put in a failsafe that would stop this very thing from happening. If you finish 1-2 without finding Thoreau, this text box will play saying that he joined your party, and he'll just appear when 1-3 loads in. So even though we never saved Thoreau or performed the flip necessary to do so, we still unlocked him just the same. So 1-3 is kind of weird. There are 2 mandatory flips in the chapter, but both of their solutions are super simple. The first one is needed to go down this 3D path so you can read a sign that tells you to jump under the red palm tree 10 times. And the second is to read the side of the signpost so you can know to press minus and 1 at the same time. I called these mandatory because someone playing for the first time would never know to do these things without flipping to 3D. But since these signposts always give these same instructions, if you know the answer, skipping the flips to 3D is fairly trivial. 1-4 unfortunately is not so kind to us, because right away we are forced to use a flip to hit this 3D block so we can enter a door. This door is suspended in midair, and you need to be standing on something to enter a door in this game. So we need the blots, and there is no known way to flip these blots from 3D to 2D without flipping ourselves. So unfortunately, we have to use our third flip of the run to progress through 1-4. A little further on in the chapter, there's 2 keys we need to collect to open these 2 locked doors. The one is easy enough, we just need to throw the row to grab it, but the other is encased in blots and requires a flip to obtain. We could potentially crouch clip through the enclosure, but if we did, we'd have no way of getting out. So we're gonna have to use a trick that's a little more advanced. That trick being key duping. Basically, if you collect a key that's sitting on the ground and activate a return pipe within a certain amount of time, the game will give you the key, but at the same time, not mark it as found. So you essentially picked up the key without the game knowing that you picked up the key, which turns the 1 key you just found into 2. I should probably explain that the return pipe is a key item that will basically always bring you back to the Flipside Tower, where you can enter one of the game's 7 worlds. So when Moonrise performs a key dupe, they get sent back to the Flipside Tower, which means they have to do 1-1, 1-2, and 1-3 again. This uses up another block since it's needed to bypass the pipe, gap, and cliff a second time. But other than that, he doesn't need to perform any extra flips to get back to 1-4 because the 3D blots we hit earlier stay in 2D since we already hit them. So now they can take the duplicated keys and unlock the 2 doors blocking our progress. However, in the very next room, there's a 3D ladder we need to climb so we can reach the next floor. Hit this switch and then rush over to this red one to make all the spike balls fall down the pit. As impossible as this may seem, we can actually do it completely flipless. But we're gonna have to introduce a few more tricks into this run. So the beginning of this trick will seem familiar. Roblox pulls out a shell shock and uses our last block to turn Mario invincible. They then bounce the shell off the wall, bouncing it all the way to the roof. Before it actually reaches the roof though, Roblox quickly uses a poison shroom, which will slowly lower Mario's HP. Now, they bounce off the shell and hit the ceiling on the very first frame they jump off of it. If you hit a ceiling on the first frame of a jump and swap to a Pixel or a different character, Mario will slide along the top of the ceiling like something is pushing him. If you keep doing this, you can get it to push you out of bounds, which Roblox does here. Once out of bounds, they jump up, let the poison shroom lower their HP to 0, and perform what's called a life shroom jump. Basically, when a life shroom revives Mario, he has 1 frame where he can jump afterwards. Roblox uses this 1 frame to jump up again and quickly throw Thoreau, hitting the switch. This activates the red switch, but since they fall back to the lower floor, they have to find their way back up there again to actually hit it. So they pull out another shell shock and poison shroom combo, but this time, instead of using a block, they just pick it up, throw it at the wall, bounce off of it, and perform the slide. Roblox then jumps up to perform another life shroom jump, which gives them just enough height to hit the spike ball, damage boosting him onto the floor. Now they can hit the red switch, completing the room in its entirety without swapping to 3D. By the way, if you're wondering where they got the items from, it's actually pretty simple. You can buy life shrooms from the shop at Flipside, and poison shrooms have a chance to drop after killing a zombie shroom, which appears in 1-1. So after that, there's really not too much left of the chapter. There's this block puzzle, which requires you to flip to 3D to see what order you need to hit them in, but the solution is always the same, so solving it without flipping is pretty easy. Then there's the Frat Tail fight, which is the exact same as the Rat Tail fight from earlier, just easier. All we have to do is use a shell shock again to get on its back, then just use Thoreau to throw enemies at its weak point, so blots are no longer necessary. Do that 3 times, Frat Tail goes down, and we beat Chapter 1 while only flipping to 3D 3 times. And considering there's 18 mandatory flips in total, I would say that's pretty good. So, usually after you beat a chapter in this game, your next step is to take your newly acquired Pure Heart and bring it to a Heart Pillar to unlock the next chapter. Unfortunately for us though, these heart pillars are mostly in the flip side outskirts, which requires 2 flips to access. You have to use the old key, which we now have to unlock this gate. Then, since it flips you back to 2D, you have to once again flip to 3D to take this path. Also, we can't just use Merlon House Clip again to save one of those flips, because the gate to the outskirts has to be open for the heart pillar that opens up chapter 2 to work properly. So we have to do something a bit different. Moonrise once again performs Merlon House Clip and makes his way to the flip side outskirts. They get to the layer after the 3D bridge, which updates his spawn point to that layer. This will be important in a second. Then they go back across the bridge, fall off, and spam the home button while they're falling. By spamming the home button every single frame, they can drain the 3D meter in the top left corner while basically keeping Mario in the same place. This is because the 3D meter will continue to deplete even while in the Wii menu, but for only 1 square. So by constantly spamming the menu button, Moonrise can deplete Mario's health and shroom jump over and over again. Since they're already out of bounds from the Merlon House Clip, they can just go under the level and make it to the other side of the gate, which they open by jumping up against it while using Throw. Yes, for some reason, this can open locks. Now, they allow themselves to fall down out of bounds and respawn by the point they set earlier by the pipe that leads to the heart pillar, saving 1 whole flip from doing it the normal way. One flip we cannot save though is the flip needed to get to the heart pillar itself. You see, when you reach the basement, you have to flip to 3D to take this path, which gives you access to the heart pillar. As of this recording though, there is no known way to skip this, so we have to use our 5th flip. The good news is though, we can actually negate having to use 2 flips needed to make our way back to flipside by just using the return pipe. Normally, you'd have to flip twice to go back down these 2 3D paths, but by using the return pipe, we can warp back to the tower and head into chapter 2. 2-1 is pretty short. There are only 2 mandatory flips, and they can both be skipped. The first one requires you to hit these 3D blocks so you can reach this pipe, but it can easily be skipped just by jumping and hitting this paratroopa, which will knock you on the ledge. For the second one, you need to flip to 3D so you can use Boomer to break these blocks, which will allow you to hit this switch, spawning the door to the end of the level. But if we enter the room from below and use Throw to pick up Boomer, we can jump just as he explodes to hit the switch, spawning the door. So even though 2-1 was easy, 2-2 is a different story, because literally right away upon entering Mimi's mansion, we're hit with the door that you can only enter if you're in 3D. It looks like you should be able to enter it in 2D since you can walk behind this curtain, but no matter what you do, you just can't. So unfortunately, we have to use our 6th flip of the run to enter this 3D door. Shortly after the 3D door, you're expected to use a flip to get on top of this spike trap so you can ride it to the top and grab the key inside this chest. But we don't have to do that. As you can see here, Kora waits until the very last second where the spike trap is basically touching Mario's head. At that point, they jump and are able to perform a ceiling slide because the spike trap is essentially acting like a roof. By doing this, they can get out of bounds and hop on top of the spike trap, ride it to the top, crouch jump on this block, and perform another ceiling slide off of it to get on the platform by the chest. While you need to flip to 3D to get on these platforms, you can just stay in 3D from the first flip, which is why I only counted the room as 1. But yeah, once they get the key, they use a poison shroom to bring their health down to 0, right near the roof, then use a life shroom to jump into another ceiling slide, letting them go out of bounds and fall back to the main floor. The last flip of 2-2 is to get around this guard dog, so we can use the key that we just obtained. Usually 3D is needed to do this, but as Kora shows here, you can just kind of jump through it while it's in its flipping animation, letting us get to the door and ending off 2-2. 2-3 is everyone's favorite chapter, where you have to run in a hamster wheel to pay off your exorbitant soul-crushing debt. But we won't be doing any of that. We'll basically be skipping the whole thing. And guess how we do it? We use another poison shroom, life shroom jump combo, and ceiling slide through this wall where you unlock Slim the Pitzel. Normally, you're supposed to use 2 flips to get Slim. One to enter the secret room, then one to leave it after the game flipped you to 2D. But we don't have to use any, because now that we have Slim, we can use a trick called a gold bar clip to clip our way past the wall. Gold bar clips, or item slides, which they're sometimes called, are really similar to ceiling slides. Basically, if you fall onto an item while using Slim, you can open the menu out of it. If you then hold a direction and switch pixels or characters, Mario will move in that direction while ignoring walls or any other collision in his way. It's basically just an easier to pull off ceiling slide, and now that we have Slim, we'll be using it a lot. So normally after doing this, you're supposed to farm up 10,000 rupees and give them to this guy, who will in turn give you the code for Mimi's safe, which will allow you to pay off the debt. This, however, requires a flip, because for some reason this guy is in 3D, and being there yourself is the only way to talk to him. But we don't care about that, because the code to the safe is always the same. So we can head back to where we found Slim, use a gold bar clip to get through the wall, get to the safe and input the code, then gold bar clip to get through this wall and fall down a couple of floors, and finally use a third gold bar clip to get past these bars and finish off 2-3 right after we pay off the debt to Mimi. 2-4 basically consists of a big maze made up of a bunch of small rooms. To navigate this maze, there are a couple of flips that are mandatory. There's 2 needed to flip these 3D blocks, because you first have to flip to hit the lower ones, jump on them in 2D, then flip to hit the ones above. Thankfully, we can skip all of this by combining a couple of tricks together. If we use a poison shroom, then throw a gold bar in the air, we can pick it up and perform an item slide while airborne. This allows Moonrise to jump in midair, because swapping out pixels has the same effect as life shrooms. As in, you can jump for a single frame after it happens. Unfortunately, you can't pick up gold bars on the first bounce, so when we actually get it, we don't have enough height, even with the item slide jump. So Moonrise has to time it so right after the jump, Peach loses her HP, which allows them to perform a life stream jump to reach the ledge. A couple rooms later, there's some blocks and a wooden ledge you have to be in 3D to jump around. But yeah, we can just gold bar clip through the wall and jump around it no problem. Now, the final room we have to look at is pretty similar to the last one, but instead of jumping around the ledge, we have to hit 3D blocks to reach it. And guess what? We're gonna use something other than gold bar clips to solve it. Moonrise picks up one of these schlurps, throws it on the ledge, then picks up the second one, jumps up with it in his hands, bonks it off the first, then, while it's spinning in the air, they land, jump again, then bounce off its head and onto the platform, ending off chapter 2 in a super stylish way. Because the boss of the chapter, the creepy Mimi spider from hell, is super easy to beat in 2D. So now that chapter 2 is over, we have to head back out to the flipside outskirts to find another heart pillar. To do this, it requires 4 flips. 1 to get through the gate again, 1 to get through this wall, and 2 more to do the exact same things, but in reverse to get back to flipside. We, however, have some brand new tech that will help us skip all of that. This is called a Z-manip, and it's absolutely insane. For some weird reason, if you get pushed by a wall while turning around, the character's Z position will get slightly changed. Our Z position would be our position in 3D space. X would be the horizontal position, Y would be the vertical, and Z would be this direction. Remember that 3D path we took earlier to get into the pit? We are essentially doing the same thing by performing one of these Z manips. We are moving Peach's Z position from this room all the way to this one. You can't really tell that it's happening though, because it's just a 2D plane. But yeah, let's talk about how to actually do it. So, as you can see, Roblox is basically just running into this corner and quickly flipping Peach back and forth. Since Peach's model is different at the front of it than it is at the back, running at the wall and flipping clips her very slightly into it. Since walls in this game don't want you in them, they push Peach out and change her Z position just a bit. Doing this over and over and over again will slowly move Peach from this room to the other one. Unfortunately though, it's not that simple because there's a wall here in 3D space that is stopping us from getting to the next room. As powerful as Z-Manips are, they can't go through walls. So Roblox does something really smart and Z-Manips in a place where there are no walls. Out of bounds. They use a gold bar clip to get out of bounds and flip Peach against the wall to continue changing her Z position. If they do this enough times, they can get past the wall and into the other room. Now, the game doesn't really show you that we're in the new room. The real clue that we actually did anything is that the pipe that normally shows up in the other room just kind of pops into existence. Which is exactly what we need, because we can now take that pipe to the room with the heart pillar, perform another gold bar clip through the wall, unlock chapter 3, then use a return pipe to get back to the tower and enter it without using a single flip. Chapter 3 of Super Paper Mario happens to be my favorite chapter in the game. It also happens to be my favorite chapter in this run because it's one of the only chapters where we don't have to use a flip even once. That's right, we can beat the entirety of Chapter 3 without using a single flip. 3-1 has one mandatory flip, and it's to get past this tall pipe in Line Land. All you have to do to skip it though is to jump from this cliff here and float over the pipe with Peach. The rest of 3-1 is super easy to do flipless, including the fight against Bowser, because for some reason, like none of the bosses in this game actually make you use the 3D mechanic. But yeah, once he's defeated, he joins our party, which is a pretty big deal because Bowser is beyond broken. Trust me, you'll see what I mean later, but for now, let's focus on 3-2. 3-2 is this whole underwater section where you're constantly being chased by a blooper and have to fight him at the end. However, there's only 2 flips needed in this whole thing. A flip to get into this pipe and a flip to get out. We don't have to do either though, as a gold bar clip works to get us past the blocks so we can enter the pipe, then when we leave it, we can do the same thing. 3-3, however, is a little more involved. This is the sub-chapter where you have to climb the giant tree to make it to Fort Francis. The first thing you need to do is climb the outside of the tree, which in fact has a couple of mandatory flips. The first one is to hit these 3D blocks so you can jump up and reach the higher platform. And the second is to cross this 3D bridge to reach the other side of this gap. To skip the first one, Moonrise picks up one of these floating pair of balls, jumps up and gets hit by it so Mario drops it out of his hands. Then he waits for it to float over and jumps on its head to reach the higher platform. For the second, he just uses Peach and her parasol to fly over the gap. Which, can I say, is kind of nice? I love the in-depth explanations and crazy tricks, but sometimes it's just nice to have a simple one, you know? Okay, so with that last skip, we were able to make our way up the outside of the tree and enter the interior. The interior of the tree is supposed to be this lengthy puzzle where you hit these switches to swap between pink and blue platforms to use them to reach the switch at the top, which spawns this door. You can actually take this pipe right at the start to where the door is, but without actually spawning the door, it's kind of pointless. On top of all this puzzling needed to reach the top of the tree, there's also 3 flips needed as well. You need one to enter this pipe so you can turn the platforms blue to progress up the tree, another one to read this sign that tells you to bomb this switch again, and a third one to get past this platform once you're at the top. Hilariously enough though, we can skip the entire 10-minute puzzle section and all 3 flips just by taking the pipe to the top, using a gold bar clip to get out of bounds, then ground and pounding with Thudley, who we just unlocked in 3-2, to hit this green guy, which allows us to jump back in bounds and hit the switch. Now we can fall all the way down the tree, take the pipe back up, and enter the door, letting us get to the Dimentio fight without any flips. Shockingly, Dimentio is another super easy fight that requires no flips, meaning 3-3 is done and we're now at Fort Francis. So before we even enter Fort Francis, we have to find a key and unlock the front door. You're supposed to flip the 3D and find it behind this block, but you can actually just jump on it in 2D and enter it no problem. Once in the castle, there are 2 3D staircases that require flips to access. The first one, we can use a gold bar clip to get into and land on the step, which we can stand on even though we're in 2D. Once Moonrise does this 2 more times, they clip out of bounds using another gold bar and jump up the final step, completing the staircase. The next one is more of the same. Moonrise jumps on the platform you're supposed to see in 3D, then jumps across to the stairs and performs a gold bar clip to get to the top. Once you're up the stairs, you're supposed to unlock the Pitzel Carry by going across this 3D bridge, saving her from the chest, then using this pipe to escape. Which takes 2 flips, mind you, but we're not going to be doing any of that. If you come into this room with the spike pit you're supposed to use carry for, we can throw a gold bar and catch it right as we hit the roof. Then we can just ceiling slide across the entire pit and make it to the other side. Doing this actually skips 4 flips in total because taking the pipe after resting in carry sends you all the way to the bottom of the fortress, which means we would have to use the 3D stairs 2 more times to get to the 2 rooms at the top and grab the keys. But by doing this, we can skip all of that and grab the 2 keys without any flips. The codes are always the same for these key rooms, by the way, so we don't have to flip to 3D to read this sign and actually learn them. Now, all we have to do is head back down to the first room and open the cat door. This does require 2 flips as the 3D stairs don't allow you to go down them while you're in 2D, but you could easily bypass this with another gold bar clip or a return pipe. After that is the boss, and you already know how that goes. Super easy and no flips needed. So, with another chapter down, you know what the drill is. We have to head back to the flip side outskirts to find another pillar. This time, we would only have to use 1 flip though, as the pillar is on the first floor of the outskirts and the gate is already open. But we don't want to do that. So instead, Roblox is gonna do the exact same crazy Z-manip shenanigans as before, so they can bring down this pipe, which will lead us to the flip side B1 outskirts. Now we can walk left and reach the puzzle you have to complete to unlock the heart pillar. You do have to spend a flip to figure out how to solve this puzzle normally, but since the solution is always the same, we can complete it completely flipless. You also would normally need 1 to get back to flip side, but as you know, we can just use the return pipe to skip it and head into chapter 4. Oh, chapter 4. We go from maybe my favorite chapter in the game to maybe my least favorite. I feel like it's just really straightforward and kind of confusing at the same time somehow. I don't know. But either way, the numbers kind of back me up here. Out of all the chapters in the game, chapter 4 has the second least amount of mandatory flips at only 9. 4-1 and 4-3 have no flips needed at all. In both subchapters, you pretty much just navigate 3D space until you reach the end. So we can completely ignore those. We will start in chapter 4-2 though, because that chapter actually poses some sort of challenge to us. This is the chapter where someone is taking a dump in a porta potty and you have to grab them toilet paper. No, I'm not joking. To do this, you basically need to walk to the right and enter a couple of people's houses to talk to them. There are 3 flips needed to do this, but they are basically all the same. There's this one with Slim, needed to get past this large cliff, this one with the 3D bridge and hallway to get past another large cliff, and the last one with a 3D tunnel, needed to get past a 3rd large cliff. Yeah, so remember when I said Bowser was completely busted? Well, yeah, he can just skip all of these flips in like 10 seconds. This is called a Bowser bump, and it basically allows Bowser to jump infinitely. Just like with the lifestream jumps I mentioned earlier, when Bowser uses his flame attack while on top of carry, there is a 1 frame window where he can jump again after the attack is over. Since we don't need lifestreams to do this, just Bowser's flames, we can chain this over and over again to jump as high as we want. As you can see, Moonrise uses it to jump over the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd tall cliffs without an issue. And if you're wondering how we got Carrie since we skipped her in chapter 3, well, just like with Thoreau, the game just kind of gives her to you if you accidentally miss her. But yeah, that gets us through 4-2 without having to use any flips, which means we just have 4-4 to complete, and that's it. 4-4. the Woe Zone. This place right here is why I hate Chapter 4. It's a super confusing maze with what feels like hundreds of doors and thousands of directions to go in. Obviously, it's not that bad, but still, this place. Basically, right off the bat, we have to go through a 3D door, the bane of this run's existence. Since there's no known way to get through 3D doors, we have to use our 7th flip to 3D to get through there. But the good news is, the rest of the chapter is a lot better, because right after the 3D door, we come across this guy, an enemy that completely blots you from this chest unless you flip to 3D. For some reason though, if you run up against the barrier and press 1 with Thudley, you'll just clip right through it. No idea why it works, but it does. You could also just use Bowser to kill this guy, but either way, getting the key is no problem. To avoid having to use a flip to get back out the 3D door, we do have to use the return pipe however, which means we have to do 4-1, 4-2, and 4-3 again. But since none of those subchapters have any mandatory flips, it doesn't really matter at all. But yeah, to use the key we just unlocked, we're supposed to use a flip to get up these 3D stairs. But if we use a Bowser bump, we can just avoid doing any of that and unlock the door no problem. The next part of the Woe Zone requires you to take a long and complex path to get on this roof so you can open the chest and then go all the way back through it so you can come back to the same room and open this door. This involves 2 flips to go down these stairs and come back up, and 2 more to enter and exit this 3D door. We, however, can actually skip this entire puzzle by using a single flip. As Moonrise shows here, you can jump up with Thudley, flip to 3D, which is our 8th flip of the run by the way, then use the same home button spam strat we saw earlier in pre-chapter 2, which allows us to drain the 3D bar to 1 block, jump again using the mechanic that allows you to jump in midair after you switch to 3D, then pause 1 more time, which deletes the last bar and causes them to take 1 hit of damage. Now, for some reason in this game, you can unlock chests in midair if you've taken damage or are using Thoreau. And since Moonrise just took damage, they could unlock the chest and grab the key, saving 3 flips in the process. As for the rest of the chapter, it's all pretty straightforward, including, yes, once again, the chapter boss. So now that we're out of that hellhole, we can make our way to chapter 5, and to do that, we have to first make our first trip to Flopside. Basically, the opposite mirrored version of Flipside. To get to Flopside, we have to first flip through this hole in the wall, then use Philippe, who is the one taking the dump by the way, to make another hole which we once again have to flip to get through. But instead of doing that, we're gonna do something a little different. First, Zim enters the Sweet Smiles restaurant, clips out of bounds, then enters the house on the other side. Since the game still thinks they're in the first house, it shows it on the screen, even though they're in the one behind it. Zim then clips out of that house and uses Peach to fly back to the first one, and with some very precise movement, they're able to exit the building while falling out of bounds at this same time. This sets their respawn position to the back layer of the house. So when they fall out of bounds and respawn, they come back near this back layer, but instead of inside the house, they are outside now. This is the first layer of Flipside where the entrance to the house is, and here is the second layer that leads to the chapel. As you can see, it lines up here with the back layer of the house. So by doing this trick, Zim basically made their way from here to here. Now they enter the house right next door, clip out of bounds again, and while the camera is panning over, they jump to what is essentially the 3D bridge and enters the chapel. As you can see, the house is here and the 3D bridge is right next to it. So as soon as the camera pan happens, they jump to the bridge and find the door. So once in the chapel, we unfortunately have to use our 9th flip of the run. To get through the chapel, you have to complete this block puzzle, then flip to 3D to go through the window it opens up. The window itself, though, isn't the problem. It's the 3D door that's the issue. Like I mentioned before, there's no way to enter these doors without being in 3D ourselves, so our hand is forced. Now, it doesn't get much better after leaving the chapel either, because if we stay in 2D, we are just stuck right by the door. We have to flip to 3D to actually walk down this pathway and make it to Flopside. Obviously though, we don't want to do that, so Moonrise is going to perform some more Z-manips. So Moonrise turns in this corner with Peach for about a minute, then swaps to Bowser and continues turning. As they approach Flopside, the camera starts to pan. I'm assuming this is because the game always expects you to be in 3D when you enter Flopside, but who knows. This panning causes collision to be inconsistent. So when Moonrise Bowser bumps and the camera turns, they're able to clip into the first layer of Flopside. Moonrise then enters the card shop. This is super useful for us because it turns the camera so the Z-axis is now pointing left instead of straight at the screen. So if they go to the left and clip through the wall with a gold bar, they can make it to the second layer of Flopside and take the elevator, which will load the rest of the town properly. They basically went from here, Z-manipped to the card shop, then clipped through the wall to this elevator here. Okay, so even though we just used a flip inside the chapel, we're gonna have to use another one almost right away. But trust me, this one is worth it. This is Welderberg, and if you pay him 300 coins, he will build you a pipe that takes you directly from Flipside to Flopside. Obviously, this is incredible and would save us a bunch of flips in the future, considering we'll have to come back to Flopside a lot. The only problem is that Welderberg can only be talked to in 3D. So we have to flip once to talk to him for our 10th flip of the run. But like I said, it's definitely worth it, because right away after finding the heart pillar, we can take the pipe back and save the 3 flips needed to get from Flopside back to Flipside. Chapter 5, in my opinion, is up there with Chapter 3 as one of the best chapters in the game. I love how you think the entire time the Floral Sapiens are the bad guys, but they were actually just driven insane by the trash the caveman guys threw in the river that poisoned their water supply. It's like weirdly deep for a Mario game and honestly just super cool. What's also super cool though is that 5-1 has no mandatory flips. Mostly because the entire thing is basically just walking back and forth while the game wastes your time with this block puzzle, but yeah, it has no flips, so let's move on to 5-2. 5-2 is the subchapter where you have to find 3 tablets and place them in the pedestals to unlock Kudge. You need 2 flips to unlock the fire tablet, one for going down this ramp and the other for coming back up. You also need 1 flip to walk around this Yoshi statue to get the stone one, and a final flip to get past this platform. The first 2 can be skipped easily enough by using a gold bar clip to get down, then a gold bar clip Bowser bump combo to get back up. We do have to use our 11th flip of the run though to walk around the Yoshi statue. The stone tablet will only spawn if you walk around it in 3D, so we don't really have a choice. Once we get all the tablets though, we can make our way to where the platform was and use a Bowser bump to get around it, unlocking Kudge for us and moving us on to chapter 5-3. So one of the first things you do in 5-3 is take this minecart to the other side of the level. Doing this requires a flip to take the correct path. A flip we don't have to use. So instead, we're gonna spend 10 hours flipping against a wall. Yes, this trick takes 10 hours. Let me explain. So we start over here and the goal is to make it to over here, to go through this hole in the wall to make it to the back layer. To do this, we need to perform Z-manips. But unlike the ones we've seen so far that brought our Z position closer to the screen, we need to go in the opposite direction, away from the screen. Z-manipping in this direction takes a really long time. Around 10 hours to be exact. It takes 10 hours to move our position from here to the back wall over here. Once there though, Moonrise takes advantage of the fact the back walls in this game are sloped and have different Z values in different places. They go to a part of the wall that is the furthest back, then walk to another part that is a bit more forward, putting them behind the wall. At this position, the game considers them to be out of bounds, but if they were to keep walking right, the wall would push them back inbounds. So instead, Moonrise goes left and performs a gold bar clip to avoid being pushed back in bounds from the wall, and then performs a Bowser bump to basically go over the entire level and reach the area with the hole in the wall. Next, Moonrise falls out of bounds, which respawns them even further away from the screen, then performs more Z-manips to get them through the hole in the wall to the back layer. At that point, they can walk right and use ceiling slides to get past the rots blocking the way, getting them through the entire minecart ride without a single flip. So after that complete nonsense, we can look at some flip saves that are a little less insane. There's this one where you crouch clip through this corner instead of flipping and blowing up these blocks, and this one where you gold bar clip through this wall instead of using 3D to pass it. Also, there's the two blocks I mentioned at the start of the video, which can be broken in 2D, but you need 3D to know you can. Moonrise actually uses a trick called a wall jump to get around the first one, then shows you can break the second one in 2D with Cudge. So yeah, no flips needed for 5-3. In 4-5, you normally go down this pit to get a key so you can unlock Dottie, which happens to use two flips, one to go down the 3D ladder and one to go back up it. But we can skip these two flips and Dottie no problem. The only reason you need Dottie in 5-4 is this spot right here where you're supposed to use her to shrink down and grab the key card. But we can just gold bar clip through the wall and use the row to grab it instead. For the final part of the stage, you need 3 flips to bomb open these pits so you can match the color of the switches inside to the ones on the wall. But as Kora shows here, you can just gold bar clip into the pits, then continue doing so until all the switches are the right color. To get out, for some reason, you can just jump through the floor even though the blocks are still there. I'm not sure if Nintendo just didn't put collision on the bottom of these blocks since the player would never be down there normally without breaking them, but either way, it works and we're done chapter 5 because once again, the boss is completely useless. So to get to chapter 6, we need to head back to Flipside and find another heart pillar. Instead of spending 3 flips to get there, 1 for the hole, 1 for the mirror, and 1 for the bridge, we're just gonna use the Weatherbird pipe instead, which skips all of that. Now, our next step is to make it to the Flopside outskirts, which requires 1 flip. But instead, we're gonna do some Z-manip shenanigans to avoid that. Remember the one that we did in the Flipside outskirts? Well, this is basically the exact same, but opposite. We want to get from this room in Flopside B2 to this one. So Roblox turns against this save block for a while to change their Z position. Then to get past the wall, they come over here, clip out of bounds, and use Luigi to turn against these blocks so they can clip past the wall and spawn the pipe. Now, we obviously haven't unlocked Luigi yet, but like I said, this run has never actually been completed before, it's just a bunch of clips stitched together. So this clip is just a proof of concept that shows the trick actually works. You can do this same thing with Bowser bumps, so it is doable at this point in the game, it's just a clip of this was never made with Bowser. But yeah, the pipe spawns that leads to the Flopside first floor outskirts, where just like with the Flipside outskirts, we have to use our 12th flip to 3D to take this bridge and reach the pillar, unlocking chapter 7 for us. Now we can just return pipe back to the Flipside tower and save us the 5 flips it would take to get back there. So chapter 6 is kind of weird. The first half of it requires no flips at all. It's mostly just fighting the Samurai guys, walking in white voids, and fighting Mr. L, which, like I said, requires no flips. However, once Mr. L is defeated, Dimentio shows up and banishes Mario and his crew to the underwear. And the underwear is where things get interesting. Right at the start of the level, there are 4 pipes that require being in 3D to get past. It does only require 1 flip to get past all 4 pipes, but it is still a flip that's necessary. To get around this though, we can use our old friend life shroom jumps. If we use 3 life shrooms and 3 poison shrooms to get over these 3 pipes, then use another life shroom and this lava bubble to get over this one. This may seem trivial, but it is necessary as Mario can only hold 10 items and we need the last 3 slots for some tricks coming up. One of those being getting to the bottom of the river Styx without flipping to 3D. Normally, you have to go through this tunnel at the bottom and open a locked door, but you can actually get out of bounds with a life shroom and swim to the door without flipping at all. Entering the door immediately brings us to this complex room where you're supposed to raise and lower water levels and use 2 flips to go down these 2 tunnels. However, with a trick called water switch skip, we can just ignore all of that. First, Moonrise gets out of bounds using the damage immunity from the poison shroom. Then they swim out of bounds and start flipping against this block to manipulate their Z position. The goal is to get from here all the way to this door over here. So they continue doing this, then move out of bounds to avoid hitting the walls, just like Roblox did back in Flipside. Finally, after 2 hours of doing this, yes, it took 2 hours, they reach the door and can enter it without using a single flip. Unfortunately, we do have to use a flip on the way back, as we need to get out of bounds and swim in 3D to make our way back through the water switch room. For some reason, certain vertical corners in this game can be walked through if you come at it from a certain starting point. So Moonrise goes into the corner of the room, then walks at a diagonal into the wall, clips out of bounds, and swims to the other door. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that we unlocked Luigi, so we can use him to navigate around these pipes we had trouble with earlier and make our way out of the underwear and back to Flipside. So at this point, you know the drill. We need to unlock the next chapter, so we take the pipe to Flopside, skipping 3 flops in the process, perform this Z-manip again, this time when we actually have Luigi unlocked. Then, once that's done, we can take this pipe up, hop over the wall with Luigi, and unlock chapter 7. Using the return pipe once again, skipping 4 flips by doing so. So here's the thing, chapter 7 only has 7 mandatory flips. And they're all pretty easy to skip, so we're gonna be flying through this one. 7-1 basically isn't even a chapter. You just head back to the underwear and talk to the queen. That's literally it. 7-2 is the super obnoxious chapter where you have to collect things for these old grannies. As obnoxious as the chapter is though, there aren't any flips, so whatever, it's cool with me. 7-3 is the other obnoxious chapter where you have to bring Princess Peach all kinds of colored apples in an attempt to wake her up from an endless slumber. To make it even more obnoxious, there's actually some mandatory flips in 7-3, but thankfully we can skip all of them. There's this one with the 3D bridge that leads to where Princess Peach is sleeping that can be skipped with Dashel. That's the last time we're using Dashel, by the way, so we did all that setup at the beginning, spent all that time going through the pit of 100 trials, pitiless, mind you, just to save like 2 or 3 flips. Don't you love minimum challenge runs? Anyways, there's 2 more skips in this chapter. This one to take the 3D path to the door where the black apple is, then another one to go back across the path and make your way back to Princess Peach. Even though there's tons of different apples you can give her, you only need the black one to actually wake her up. So those are the only flips you need. After you're done, you're supposed to use Peach to bring this Cloud Cyrus a red apple, so he can grow giant and bounce you up to the end of the level. We, however, can literally skip all of this. The 2 flips, saving Peach, the cloud bounce, everything. All we have to do is get on top of the building near the cloud, then Bowser bump for like a minute straight until we reach the platform the cloud is normally supposed to get us to. This does mean we won't have Peach for the rest of the run, but like, who cares? We have Bowser bumps. In 7-4, you're tasked with collecting 3 orbs, which will allow you to spawn this rainbow bridge to the end of the level. There's no flips needed to get the blue orb, but you have to flip once to get through this door for the red orb, and flip twice to go across this bridge, grab the yellow orb, and come back. But big surprise, we can just Bowser bump over the gap where the rainbow is supposed to spawn, and go on to fight the boss, who once again, for some reason, never actually requires you to use 3D. This ends off chapter 7, a chapter that normally requires you to flip 7 times, but we just beat it in 0. So, to get to chapter 8, we basically just have to do the same thing we did to get to chapter 7. Take the pipe to Flopside to skip 3 flips, do the Z-manip in the basement to skip another one, then put the heart in the heart pillar and use the return pipe to skip 5 flips in total. Nice and simple, right? Well, don't get used to it, because chapter 8 is anything but simple. Chapter 8 involves you navigating through the labyrinth that is Count Blett's castle, and let me tell you, it is a nightmare. Up until this point, which is basically the entire rest of the game, we've only had to use 13 flips to 3D. Which seems pretty good, right? Well, Castle Black is about to come and take a shit all over that number. There are 21 mandatory flips in this chapter, more than any other chapter in the entire game. And way too many of them can't be skipped. It is truly tragic. But to show you how tragic it really is, let's hop into chapter 8 and see what's going on. 8-1 has 2 mandatory flips. And guess what? Both of them can't be skipped. You need one to enter this door and another to enter this one. Like I mentioned before, there is no way to skip 3D doors, so we just have to take it on the chin and move on to the next chapter. 8-2 has this section where Merlon shows up and tells you to hit this switch. If you hit it, you will fall down into a trap and he'll reveal himself to be Mimi. To get out of this trap, you're supposed to bomb this wall and use a flip to get through it. Then solve a puzzle with some pipes, grab a key, and use another flip to get through this hole and open the door. But if we refuse to hit the block, gold bar clip out of bounds, then use Luigi to get to the floor above, we can get the key, clip out of bounds again, and open the door without Mimi having any idea that we just scammed her. Unfortunately, to end 8-2, we do have to flip one time to kill these 3D enemies. As long as you're in 2D, they just won't show up, and we need to kill them to get a key to progress to the castle, so unfortunately, a flip is necessary. And guess what? The necessary flips don't end, because right after defeating Mimi a second time and moving on to 8-3, we're forced to use a flip to get through this mirror to grab a key. Thankfully, we only have to use one, as you can open up chests in this game without reverting to 2D, but still, it's one flip we have to use, and that sucks. In literally the next room, you're required to flip again to go down this 3D hallway to progress. Thankfully though, we can skip this one. We just have to use a gold bar clip to get through the staircase, and we're good. Shortly after the stairs, there's a puzzle involving 3 blocks, which requires 3D to see the order you need to hit them in. But like every puzzle in the game, the solution is always the same, so if we know the order, we can hit the blocks and complete the puzzle without ever having to flip to 3D. Completing the puzzle nets you a key, which has to be used on this door, but only after you flip again to go down this 3D hallway, which we can obviously just skip the same way as before. After you open the door, you're treated to another puzzle room, which requires you to flip so you can see the route you're supposed to take that's labeled on the wall. Again, the solution is always the same, so we don't need to flip. Where we do need to flip though, is through another one of these stupid mirrors to grab another stupid key. Just like before though, we can stay in 3D, so only one flip is necessary. To end off chapter 8-3, there's a chase sequence where you have to follow Dementio through a bunch of previous chapters to try and catch her. Naturally, there's some mandatory flips that are needed, but most of them we've already seen. You need Dashel again to jump over the large gap in 1-1, you need a gold bar clip to get through this wall that leads to the vault in 2-3, you need another gold bar clip to bypass the 3D ramp, and finally, you need to use a gold bar clip, poison shroom, life shroom combo to get past the large cliff in 4-2. If you're wondering why we couldn't just Bowser bump across the gap in 1-1, or the large cliff in 4-2, it's because Bowser gets stuck holding the roof with O-Chunks back in 8-1. So he's no longer in our party. I guess I lied too, eh? We actually had to use Dashel one more time, so I guess he saves like 4 flips, which actually isn't too bad. Dear God, this journey is almost over. We have now come to the last subchapter in the game, 8-4. And let's just say 8-4 is not kind to us. There is a flip right at the start that we can skip where you use a gold bar clip to get past this wall, but then it just kind of goes downhill from there. We have to use a flip to find this pipe in 3D, which unfortunately is just a bit too short to be used in 2D. There is this flip that allows you to get through this narrow gap with Slim that we actually can skip though. You would think we could just use a gold bar clip to get through the wall, but since you're supposed to go through this gap with Slim, the game expects your Z value to be in the middle of the room. If it's not, the gold bar clip just won't work. So you know what that means. Some more Z manipulation. Roblox clips into this pipe, then turns around against its edge. After doing that for a while, their Z position is in the middle of the room, and they can clip into the wall, grab the key, and clip back out. But yeah, that marks the last flip in the game that we can skip, because the final 3 flips of the game are unskippable. All 3 of them are to access these 3D hallways, and there's just no known way to skip them. You need to use one in this room, and finally this last room, and they are all mandatory. As depressing as that is though, the rest of the game, which there isn't very much of, is completely flipless, including Count Black and Super Dementio, because for some reason the developers just didn't think it'd be cool to include 3D in any boss fights. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm happy about because it means less flips for this challenge, but it just seems like such a baffling decision. It'd be like if the bosses in Super Mario Sunshine didn't require FLUDD. It's just so weird. Either way though, that's the challenge. That is every single mandatory flip in the game, and every single way the Super Paper Mario community knows how to skip them. If you're wondering, out of the 151 mandatory flips in the game, only 22 of them are unskippable, which is absolutely insane. 151 is already the absolute bare minimum needed to beat the game casually. A regular person would probably see like 10 times that number. So, while 22 may seem a bit high, considering how long this game is and how important of a mechanic flipping to 3D is, I think it's pretty crazy that it even got that low in the first place. I would like to give a huge shout out to L_K, Zim, DMG Dude 2, Kora, Igrmi, Roblox, 8192, and Moonrise for their help on this video. Moonrise gathered like 90% of the tricks shown off in this video and answered a bunch of my questions on how they worked. This video would not have been possible without them, so Moonrise, thank you. Also, shout out to Bringle, whose videos were very helpful with just learning some general knowledge type stuff about the game. But yeah guys, that's it for me. I just hope you enjoyed this feature-length film about Super Paper Mario Flipless, and I will see you in the next video. This video was made possible through the support of our amazing patrons. I want to give a special shout out to Rebecca Lyons, Lay Burb, Puddles Megan, Nice Gamer Musics, Serena Bliss, TXCS_14. Blue Pikmin is the best Pikmin, and if you say otherwise, then Louie will eat your soul. Also, this is a completely real name. Young Smokey VP $17, Young Smokey VP 17, Clone Trooper Wheeler, Real Backfish, Charm City Gamer, David Baden, and Yellow Pikmin are the best.